Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Kia ora, colleagues. We are so thrilled that you are with us today and you've come on a very special afternoon. Sort of slightly Rocky Horror Picture Show, but not quite as glamorous. Today we're going to be talking about a confirmation of candidature for the wonderful Maeve and a mid-candidature confirmation for Amanda, the difficult middle child. And I need to some particularly fantastic introductions to spectacular colleagues. I'm hoping the wonderful Shani is in, Aidan is in, and Jamie are in. These are my fellow supervisors. You think your life is tough, these people supervise with me. I'm incredibly grateful and thankful for their intellectual contribution and everything that they are and everything that they do. There's two other spectacular humans I have to introduce, and that is the remarkable Gail and the incredible Leanne. These two scholars joining us from Edith Cowan and the University of the Sunshine Coast are giving of their time for free. They're giving their expertise for free because they believe in the calibre and the quality of international higher education. We are grateful for them and we are grateful for their expertise. And just for colleagues that have come in late, Leanne and Gail enacted Amanda's confirmation of candidature. So, and I won't get emotional, but how amazing is it that they return to enact a mid-candidature review? We are so thankful for you. So we've got Maeve's confirmation of candidature coming in and Amanda's mid-candidature. So Maeve is yet to join us at this juncture. So if Amanda is comfortable, let's crack on with the difficult middle child, the mid-candidature presentation, where it's so difficult, colleagues, because you're like halfway through, but how do you know if you're halfway through? Because you don't know where it's going to end. So it's terribly exciting. Amanda, I'm very happy for you to be the queen of
share
now. Take over and share.
Yeah.
In a good socialist fashion, share. And colleagues, we thank you so much for your time. Amanda, whenever you're ready, good luck, Angel. We're with you. You're the best. Rock and roll. Yeah, darling. Yeah. Look at Aiden's face.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'll start. All right. Thank you for joining me today for my mid-candidature review. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and Japan, and thank you to my wonderful supervisors, Tara, Jamie, Shani, and Aidan. Thank you also to Gail and Leanne for being here again today, and everyone else for joining us. I have an outline of the presentation, so introduction, statement of purpose, key literature, significance of the research, methodology, the approaches and also the framework for that, data collection methods, participants, the importance and the relevance of the study, and progress to date, and also some ideas for moving forward with the research to completion. Ethics, credibility, originality, also the limitations and the delimitations of the research, and my conclusion. So a little bit of background about me, having lived in Taiwan, Japan and South Korea, working in international schools. My disciplinary method is in visual arts and design, various leadership roles as an MYP coordinator, also career-related program coordinator currently, and working in the MYP program as well. Also doing some examination in the visual arts in the MYP program and diploma program for the IB, and also just currently doing some consulting work for a school in the US in relation to interdisciplinary learning and helping them move forward with their implementation of that in their school, in their MYP program. So I want introduction slide. And then I've finished with that one. So if we move to slide 4, please. Statement of purpose. So As Japan is
Oh, are you kidding me? We lost.
oh, this keeps dropping out.
Keep going, sweetheart. You're doing
Okay. So yeah, Japan is changing dramatically in relation to their educational outlook and the innovative implementation and processes that they want to undertake, particularly with the IB curriculum framework and placing that in their national curriculum. That is, a lot of that work has been undertaken through the Japanese government, the Japanese Business Federation, and also MEXT, which is the Japanese Education Department. They have a very ageing population in Japan, which is becoming quite, I think, an issue within the country. So they're wanting to try and look at innovative processes for education to try and move the country forward. Also, with this, the methodology that I was looking at, I had, since my last, my confirmation of candidature, I've re-looked at that and looked at more third space and standpoint theory, and as an in-betweener myself, having lived in Japan, seeing that as a bit more appropriate for me, and therefore seeking new knowledge and also the contribution of knowledge to this area because of the implementation of the MYP in Japan with interdisciplinary teaching and learning, to improve teaching pedagogy for teachers in Japanese schools and also in international schools, and also working with schools in Japan and some university educators that I have actually, in the last 12 months or since we last came together, been in contact with and just discussing future collaborations with them. Next slide, please, Aidan. Thank you. And specifically, my general question was, how do teachers understand interdisciplinary teaching and learning in the middle years in Japan? And in relation to the more specifics of that is looking at Japanese international schools and the Article 1 schools. Now, the Article 1 schools are the public schools in Japan. What are some of the enablers and the barriers to interdisciplinary teaching and learning in Japan? What does it really look like in the school context? Is it more interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary? So these were some of the questions that I'd asked the teachers in the surveys. What are some of the key concepts they use more regularly, global contexts? Also asking them questions about time allocation, resources and activities. Next slide, please, Aidan. So the literature review, we did discuss this previously, but I've just inserted this slide as a reminder. Still looking more at a lot of Japanese researchers and trying to make sure that their research and their voices are heard in my research. And that's why I think the methodology that that third space standpoint and in-betweener fits this investigation. Next slide, please, Aidan, thank you. So I'll probably spend a bit more time on the methodology and the literature and the approaches that I've taken to date. So looking at third space and also looking at the various languages, if we have the Japanese language and the English language, and then often the Japanese teachers will be speaking English as well. However, not many of the English speakers actually speak Japanese. So you have the home language and then the language at work in the work environment, which is mixed, and creating that third space, that other identity, and people, I suppose, that translanguaging aspect which I'll discuss a bit further on, but that's now become very much on the IB radar. That tension in between expectations in the IB situation in those spaces, different ideologies, different sorts of cultures and norms, and then I suppose that sort of that clash that we get from that. So looking at translocalism and how that fits into the third space. If we go to the next slide, please, Aidan. So I considered this as well. So the consideration of the local context and looking at how Gertz discussed the shape of knowledge and how it was constructed in context. And we have the Japanese. The Japanese are sort of, I suppose, they're the gatekeepers of their own education system. MEXT, which is the Japanese Education Department, and the government have invited the IB into their system. So I suppose this model here that I've created is we have the American ideas, that context of the USA, the IB system, moving across into the Japanese system and their context, but then they have different ideas, then creating that unfamiliar frame of awareness. So nobody sort of really knows what it's meant to be, but just thinking and touching on Syed and that idea of coexistence and trying to bring that together to make that a workable situation for all. And just an interesting point that the Pew Research Centre that fewer than 20% of students in the US study a foreign language, whereas compared to Europeans, it's 92%. So that made me think about that frame of awareness that they don't study a foreign language. So how do they have an understanding of a different frame of awareness and a different culture? Next slide. Thanks, Aidan. So looking at translanguaging, I was at a conference and they were talking about students and how students need to translanguage, and that made me think about, well, what about the teachers? Surely they must need to translanguage. So looking at co-planning, co-teaching, co-assessing, co-reflecting, and to try and create that collaborative cycle, that common understanding with the different languages. And there's a lovely story of the school that I worked at in Japan where the teachers spoke in several different languages in the department. There was Spanish, French, Japanese, and they would actually speak all those languages at once in a sentence to make sense for sense. So to try and create that understanding so that it was translated across, and the thinking was there. Everyone had an understanding. Next slide, please, Aidan. I looked at leadership as well, and looking at, what are the privileges with in particular sort of contexts and situations. And Syed, I've read a lot of his work and I really enjoyed reading his work, and just thinking about, if we read Western texts, shouldn't we be reading other texts as well? Like, what about reading some of the Asian texts, and looking at the IB curriculum and when it travels, and the different spaces that it moves from one location to another, but does it really transfer across, and is, I think the IB documents are quite flexible. I think it's the way some people interpret them, or how their sense of what they know and understand, and trying to translate that to a new situation. And sometimes it doesn't get translated to the new situation very well. So, the privilege of particular people. So that's what I looked at, the standpoint theory and the Cartesian divide. we talked about at the last meeting that we had together. So the voices of the minority, and I do see the Japanese and the Japanese teachers, I suppose, and just their ways of thinking and understanding and looking at that Western lens and making sure that everyone has a different lens, and with the different languages that we have, is there the understanding that is developed through that, and then therefore having that coexistence. Next slide, please, Aidan. Also looking at transnationalism, so creating distinctive spaces, and when you have that combination of different cultures, you've got the Western lens, the Japanese, you've got this model, I suppose, this clash of everything that's coming together, and then how is that it moves into that third space, and is that cultural representation, is it even amongst all parties, or is it more, I suppose, more leaning towards one party, thinking of the Western lens? So again, with the standpoint theory, like, are we all represented? Is everyone truly heard in what they need to say to create that understanding that everyone can be a part of? Next slide, please, Aidan. So looking at my methodology, looking at the, I suppose, the theory and that symbolic interactionism, and trying to just make sure that people can make sense. Also, the third space and the autoethnography, so my representation, but that will change slightly because of the third space, and also the my time has just gone off. Research methods, so looking at the document analysis, interview and survey, and I'll talk a bit more about that. I think that's on the next slide. Thanks, Aidan. So the surveys were collected first, but I looked at them after the interviews. I did the interviews. So once I got a note back from a participant saying that they'd be happy to do an interview, I jumped on that straight away, because I was worried that they then changed their mind, because understanding that teachers are very busy, and I wanted to try and collect as much of that information as possible. So I was moving sort of backwards and forwards in between the surveys and the interviews. Then that's probably why I looked at the interviews first, because I put them through Qualtics to make sure that I got the transcriptions, and then went through them and grouped all the questions. I was worried about a small data set, and as much as I tried to get as many participants as possible, it just wasn't happening. But I'm going to the IB Global Conference in Adelaide, so I'm going to be harassing a few people at that conference. Try and have an interview. Anyway, I'll see how I go. Next slide, please, Aidan. So you can see here, this is the data collection, the surveys, the interviews, the follow-up. I haven't undertaken that as yet, and surprisingly enough, just through luck and just sort of getting to know someone in Japan, I have had one more survey. So I now have 5 Japanese speaking surveys. So I'm going to hopefully see if that person wouldn't mind trying to, put my survey link out at their school. Next slide, please, Aidan. So these are the participant groups that I went to. So LinkedIn, that was done both in Japanese and English. That was provided. All the Facebook groups, all the WhatsApp groups, the MYP East Asian Network, different people I know, and also at Tamagawa University with the IB training course there. The link was sent there as well. So I feel like I've tried as much as I can to try and get as many participants as possible, but it's been very difficult. Next slide, please, Aidan. Thank you. So the significance of the research is very much for the implementation of interdisciplinary teaching and learning within Japan in relation to international schools and Article 1 schools. Also, it will help support, I think, the understandings and maybe some of the problems that schools face with the implementation of this area due to all the variety of cultural understandings, I think, and the differences between the two lenses. Next slide, please, Aidan. So progress to date, connected with participants, compiled the surveys, use of Qualtrics, Zoom for the interviews, transcription through the SharePoint. That was really handy, putting that audio file in there and all the transcriptions coming through. Investigation of third space and analysis of surveys. Also, initial analysis of the transcriptions and then the various writing. Next slide, please. So moving forward, I'll want to finalise some of the data from Qualtrics, the follow-up interviews as well. I'd like to do more document analysis for the IB, but I'm waiting a little bit because of they often update their documents. So further transcriptions from participants and thesis writing, editing, drafting process, submission for aiming February 2024. Next slide, please, Aidan. And the ethics, that's fine. All the work is housed in the SharePoint, so it's safe there. The work that I have done, the transcriptions to date, that I have sort of gathered, I've sent all of that to the participants, and all of them have replied, bar two people, and they've endorsed the dialogue. I just wanted to do that for the credibility side of things. So I'll do more analysis with that, and also the final write-up of interviews. Once that's done, I'll send it back to the participants for them to check that they're happy. Yes, so next slide, please. And the delimitations and limitations. So obviously geographical locations for me, you can see I've moved around quite a bit from Japan, Australia. Now I'm in South Korea. Different sorts of participants that you get from the international schools and Article 1 schools. The participant size was much smaller than I'd hoped. COVID also delivered a lot of uncertainty. However, the data collection via the electronic methods was probably a good thing with Qualtrics. Also, the interviews via Zoom made it a bit more comfortable for the participants because they could do it in their own environment. So that was it was more neutral. Next slide, please, Aidan. So in conclusion, the current literature tells us there is no research in this area. And also from a quick gleaning of what I've looked at from what's come back from participants, that they don't have enough planning time, they don't have enough collaboration time, they want more professional development in the area or workshops. They want to see samples of student work to gain understanding. And mathematics is less likely to be used in an interdisciplinary unit, which I found really surprising. Yeah. Next slide. Thank you. Oh, that's it. That's it. Finished.
Brilliant. Well done.
Awadi.
So firstly, can we all just join and revel in the excitement with Amanda that she's done that. Congratulations, Alan. Digitisation, what can we say? You did a fantastic job. Colleagues, we're now hurtling to Leanne and to Gail for the 10-minute assessor questions. Gail, would you like to batter up, start us off, my darling?
Congratulations, Amanda.
Thank you.
I want to start by saying the journey that you've come on since the last presentation. And there's a lot more depth, a lot more critical kind of analysis around different ways of knowing, different ways of being, different values, judgments and value systems around knowledge as well, which is inherent within the document that you prepared for the presentation as well as the presentation. So I want to say, you know, thank you for that. I think that you've also articulated that kind of the problematics around that Cartesian divide. And I think that that's really come to the fore as well. And I just, again, just practically, I guess, congratulations on hurtling through, despite the barriers to recruiting in the way that you had anticipated that you might be able to. You found workarounds, and I think that that's all credit to you and your resilience and your grit. So I wanted to acknowledge that up front as well. I have some statements more than questions. And apologies for the men in the room, you know, not all men, but I kind of feel a little bit like a male academic in a conference where they say any questions and they just make long, long statements where their own voice is privileged in the guise of a question. So I'm going to say up front that these are not necessarily all questions, Amanda. They may be some comments, but there will be some questions associated as well. Leanne, are you happy for me to go through these, or did you want to kind of come in and interject along the way? How did you want to play this?
No, you go, Gail.
Okay, so I was really interested and pleased to see and hear your discussion around trans language. And for me, that again was a salient point that was brought to the fore that I hadn't really understood it from your work before, and I thought it was excellent. And then I started to think about the kind of trans languages, and not necessarily just those languages that are spoken in different countries, but what the languages are around disciplines, etc. So I might come back to that, but I think that that's a broad, for me, that becomes the broad umbrella of the whole work so far, is this notion of trans language, whether that's disciplinary language, whether that's actually a country-based, you know, code of communication through verbal language or written language. I think there's lots of languages going on here, and this notion of trans language and transdisciplinarity, etc., I think becomes the overarching kind of focus, or it had for me, it became the salient focus of your work so far. You mentioned as well standpoint, and you've also mentioned autoethnography, and that was the one thing that I wanted you to draw more on. So I wanted to know, and I'm coming out of my notes now so I can see you. So I wanted to know where you are in this research, what your backstory is, what drew you to this, what your lived experience has been in terms of travel, in terms of navigating trans languages, disciplinary languages, but also geographical based languages. And I just wanted more of you in the document. So I kept asking, but what about you? What about your perspective? Why did you arrive at this question? Why did you arrive at this this lens, or this particular area of critique and exploration, etc.? So that's not necessarily something that you have to kind of answer now. It'd probably take a little bit of thinking about. But for me, I'd be inviting more of you and more of your positionality.
Okay.
Document.
So you mean about the trans languaging? Why did I, or more? Yeah.
All of it, like from the beginning, who are you?
Yeah.
What has your journey been to this point, professionally, personally, geographically? What brought you to this area of investigation? I'm always really interested now. Why does this mythology, isn't there, around the fact that we research dispassionately, that we research objectively, that the research we present is somehow outside of our lived experience. And thankfully, over the last kind of 40, 50 years, that's been problematized, and certainly around kind of feminist lenses, etc., and standpoint that you've mentioned, that's become problematized. I think you can just draw more attention to that by locating yourself from the beginning. This is my journey. This is why I'm interested. This is what drew me to this investigation. This is my position within it. This is why I'm asking these questions, and this is what I want to find out. And you've been quite honest in your document. You're saying that there is no neutrality in the analysis of data. I think you can preface that right at the beginning, say there's no neutrality in any aspect of the research process, because you're drawn to investigate that which you have an interest in, and it's usually because of one's lived experience in some way. And for me, I wanted that up front, and I think that there's more opportunity to hear your voice more and to hear your story more in a piece. Yeah.
I think just like really quickly, to a quick answer, well, the first thing that jumped to my mind was, because I always think, why do people always think they're right? Do you know, I mean, when I work with people, I work with lots of nationalities, and I from that Western lens, and I think, why do you always think you're right?
But your positionality will show it's partial. That's the beautiful thing about that. When you say, I'm looking at it from this perspective because of this aspect of my lived experience, I'm therefore presenting a partial response to these questions, understood through my experience, framed through my experience. And so there's a cultural humility in that itself.
Yeah.
Gail, that's tremendous.
Thank
because
you.
That also enables us to consider how one handles a small data set. And by the way, when poor Amanda was talking about anxiety, I have given her that anxiety. So I insert anxiety emoji. So as you rightly said, if we can configure standpoint theory with the notion that a small data set is illustrative and not representative, that bundle will be managed quite beautifully, I think. Does that solve your problems, Gail, just so we can resolve that before we go to Leanne? Oh
yeah, it does. I've got 2 or 3 things that I'd like to add as well, but if I run out of time.
No, please, go for it. Go.
Okay. I love the idea, this notion of coexistence, and I think again of all that framing in terms of who you are within the research will support that notion of coexistence as well, that there are other ways of knowing this area of research and investigating it. Just in terms of your written document, I'd be asking that you introduce and then define the key terms that you use the first time that you use them. For example, just symbolic interactions, whatever it is, whatever those key terms are. For me, it would be really useful to have a little bit of a location around them. What does that term mean, or how are you employing that particular theory or concept? And then, of course, because I've got a gender lens that I apply to everything, my question is around the gender of the participants. Is it significant in any way? Is that something that you've looked to answer? But then I started to kind of think a little bit more around the gender lens more generally. And that is that we know that disciplines are dichotomized and hierarchized, discipline fields. And I love the fact that, the International Baccalaureate is trying actually to and destabilize some of those hierarchies by actually looking at them in relation to one another, etc. And so I wonder again, and it's not necessarily something that you need to investigate, but in your analysis, I wonder if what you are doing in supporting and promoting translanguage, transdisciplinarity, if in itself that is a gendered and actually an arguably feminist approach, because you are decentering in the process of promoting trans language, you're decentering the West, but in the process of decentering maths and sciences and some of those disciplines that are presented as kind of higher value than some of the more kind of humanities and arts-based, the decentering of those within transdisciplinarity actually is also a political tool, and I would argue a feminist tool. Just thought I would.
Yep, no, that's good. Thank you.
And then, but one last thing, sorry, did anybody want to say something?
No, go Gail. You're doing fantastically. Go Gail.
Okay, the last thing is around discipline. It's used in different ways in your document, and it's used in different ways in your thinking. And I'd love for you to kind of consider the relationship between those ways. So you've talked about disciplines as in, you know, the traditional demarcation of knowledge units that we have through these atomized kind of disciplines, but also you talked about the discipline of your second son, the discipline that you channeled. And I think that there's a relationship between the two. That I just found discipline to be a really strong motif that came through your work. And I just wonder again, and it's completely up to you because that's a private space, but if we are looking at standpoint, if we are looking at autoethnography, I think that there's a way in where you start looking at, what do I mean by discipline in this thesis? Because it's taken on different guises. And I love that. I found that interesting. And I just, for me, I just almost saw that there was a whole chapter around discipline, but the different ways of thinking about discipline, different disciplinary kind of notions and identities and definitions. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you.
Oh, Amanda, that's fantastic.
Thanks, Gail.
Thank you. Chapter, how brilliant is Gail? So I'm conscious, Leanne, we'll move to the Anne's question, then we'll move into the Maeve space. And for all the colleagues on the call, there is a general question time at the end. So if you've got a question, we want to hear from you. We want to hear those questions, but we'll just make sure our assessors have their time. So Dr. McRae, batter up.
Hi, thanks. Thank you, Amanda. Really lovely presentation. And I echo Gail's feedback about how much you've grown and progressed and you know, worked with these ideas. So congratulations to you for that. Being in the middle can be really overwhelming, and I can see that you're really starting to grapple with a lot of these ideas. So yeah. Thank you. That's really good.
Thank you.
So I guess I just have a few things. I guess I just want to push you on just a few things. So Gail's really supportive and lovely, and I'm going to be a little bit more of a hard ass. But in the nicest possible way, because I think there's really lovely, you're really starting to move into some really challenging space. So I guess the first note I have for you is just to really challenge you on some of the bigger theoretical ideas that you're now starting to draw into your work, because I think you have a really excellent grounding in your field and in your experience and in how you're understanding your relationship to the teachers and to the institutions and into the curriculum as a whole. I think that's really coming through really strongly. But just kind of pushing you on things of like thinking through third space a little bit more, and it's a really challenging area, and it's really scary and really big and really complex. So I don't want you to be too stressed about it, because it will come, because now you're in the middle. As you get to, you know, I worked with third space in my PhD. I didn't get it till my third year. I was, you know, so don't be concerned. But I just want to push you a little bit more on that, and just to be really conscious that third space is not only hybridity. Hybridity is part of third space, but try not to make that equation too easy, I guess, for yourself. I think, and it's going to help you, I think, in another area, particularly around the autoethnography component of your work, and how you're going to use standpoint theory, I'm hoping, to complicate the relationship between autoethnography and reflection. And I think weaving and understanding third space through that is potentially going to help you crumble those expectations. And as part of that, I really want to tap into also Gail really tapped into the trans language stuff, which I think is really evocative, and Gail's absolutely right to be, you know, saying that that's such an innovative part of your work and your research. And I was really interested in how you talked about how I picked up on the word code switching that you deployed in your work that you sent through. And to me, that was such an important moment, this intuitive, powerful, unrecognized strategy that people use within this space that is incredibly empowering and incredibly complex and nuanced, but it doesn't necessarily get codified and recognized. And I was really interested in how you're going to think about trans language and the way in which a curriculum works to, in some ways, disciplinize those things, and how what gets left out of that, I think, is really interesting. What it goes in and what goes out of the curriculum. And connected to that, I was really wanting a little more information in your work about what the IB is framing as interdisciplinarity, because there's a lot in there about, oh, interdisciplinarity is going to be mandatory, interdisciplinarity is about being a global citizen, about solving complex problems, but how are they, what I mean, what do they think interdisciplinarity is? What are they putting in as the framework for what is an interdisciplinary unit or curriculum or whatever is that compulsory component? And I felt I really wanted that information there, because that to me was the springboard for understanding why, in many ways, the teacher was being seen as the problem. And that relationship there. So I'm sorry I don't actually have a direct question for you. It's just more about me trying to think through and push you a little bit more on those really interesting areas. The post-colonial stuff is starting to look really good. The Edward Said stuff that you're starting to read is going to filter through beautifully into your work, and I think it's really going to supplement and support the really crunchy work you're doing within the curriculum space and the pedagogy space that you're working with.
Yeah. Thank you.
Amanda, how do you feel? The notion we probably have made in your thesis, and I blame myself rather than you, the teacher as problem. Maybe the originating definitions are where the issue starts and the application merely or amplifies it.
Yeah, I think because the IB defines it as, like 2 or more subjects that solve a problem, create a new idea, and then teachers read that sort of literally, and it's, you can only use 2 subjects, or you can only do this, or you can only do that. And that's, they just from my experience, they don't see the IB documentation as being flexible, because a lot of, when evaluators go to schools, they then say, oh no, it must be like this, or the IB says it's this, but they don't understand. If you actually read the documentation, it is more flexible than, I always make it flexible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Powerful, but that's also about an individual teacher deciding to be flexible or not deciding to be flexible, rather than the system innate.
Yes, I think, and I that's why I think the standpoint theory is quite important, because having worked with Japanese teachers and Taiwanese teachers and now Korean teachers, they work on a hierarchy, and they will often read the documents and follow it by the letter. So trying to say to them, and they if they make a mistake that it's really bad, or I say, no, you don't worry, because you know, these are flexible, these documents. So yeah, there's a lot of that, and maybe that's the third space, that flexibility.
It is, and I think
I'm hoping it is.
And it is, and I really want to thank Leanne for, and I again would blame myself rather than wonderful Amanda, that we start to think, yes, hybridity, but actually we focus on the movement of ideas that may or may not be transforming through that movement. So I think that's been the crucial moment here. I'm thrilled. So Leanne and Gail, once more, we don't pay you enough. We haven't paid you anything. We should be paying you everything. Thank you for that. You've enabled the last year of Amanda's candidature, and colleagues will be coming back to Amanda at the conclusion. But Maeve, it is your turn, so please demute, and you should be absolutely able to share your screen, darling.
Well, I've sent messages to the wonderful Aidan, and Aidan is going to put up my PowerPoint and shift it for me. And apologies, you will laugh, Tara, but actually I put on the wrong watch. So I live near the Queensland border. I have 2 watches, and one is set to Queensland time and one is not set to New South Wales time. And I swapped them at winter, etc., etc. And I had the wrong watch on.
Maeve, don't worry. It's 1987. Don't worry about it at all. Aidan, you, our beautiful assistant, please begin.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Amanda. Really enjoyed your presentation, and Gail and Leanne were wow. I'd like to just do my own acknowledgement to country. I live in the Bundjalung Nation, and I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and future. Next slide. And I'd like to acknowledge that my work, my work is in one sense, the novel takes place, the artefact in the novel takes place in King's Cross, which is the home of the Eora Nation and the Gadigal people. Next slide. This is my current working title, Ultra-Realist Feminism Infiltrates the Crime Novel, a revision of 1975 King's Cross, Australia. Next one. I've attempted to make some addressing of the question of why am I doing this? So I actually lived in King's Cross, but the cheat is that it was in 1976, not 1975. So that requires quite a lot of unobtrusive methods where I actually have to research things before I can say them. I love crime. I love crime in all its forms, and I'm sure one shouldn't say that, but I totally do. So my key thread here that that drives me and that operates through the entirety of my PhD, both exegesis, mitigating journal and artifact, is injustice. And I think at times in life I've maybe thought, I don't know, perhaps we all have that somehow we fight injustice on our own. But I think everything I've learned is that we fight injustice through teams and groups and community, and that we do it by being together. And I think the intellectual community around Tara is a home for me. The next thing would be that made me a bit teary. I saw your hands go up there. Operationalise creative and academic thinking. So I'm actually very, very fascinated by how academia and creativity can work together to get an optimization. And, you know, not to squash one part of that, whether it's academic or creative, but to allow that to stimulate each other. I'm also fascinated by the role of journaling in creative practice. So that was a key thing that I learned in my master's. I'm a person who finds reflection a natural, you know, ever since I first learned about it, which was actually many years ago, that's a natural state for me. So journaling, reflecting, looking for themes, understanding my own creative practice, those things are all really key. And because I thought I'd forgot injustice, I put it in twice. Next slide. So the structure of the presentation is what we've done so far. Quick look at synopsis sentences. I'm going to almost skip that. Theoretical frameworks is where I'm going to linger longer and just very quickly go a bit further. The creative-led PhD, that is the entirety of what I'm doing. Significant original contribution to knowledge, a look at that. We'll look at sonics in the PhD, have a quick look at the planned chapters. I have articles published. We'll look at the bibliography. Next slide, thank you. So I just wanted to explain just a little bit of how this operates at PhD level. So the exegesis in this instance is 40,000 words. And essentially, you've got to really set that up and really use those 40,000 words to make your case about why the artifact, how they're going to interact and what the artifact is going to do. So the artifact is 60,000 words. In my case, it could be called a novella, but within the university, we call it a novel. And it is the artifact. And that is how I'm going to express the exegesis. In the mitigating journal is a kind of iterative experience. It links, it verifies, and there are some ways in which it operates to make a qualitative study stronger because it is showing you how you move from one place to the other. So I am very, very happy with the creative-led PhD as where I'm going. We are going to do one more slide on it where I'll explain some other bits, but overall, this is suiting me extremely well. Next slide. Thank you, Aidan. So synopsis sentences, I'm going to not go there, I've decided, but yeah, you'll love some of the images that are going to come, and Tara and Jamie, you'll be surprised. It's actually Aidan who got first view on this, and none of these images were in the one I sent them. So I do things like that, and so we'll go to the next slide. Got you worried. So the theoretical frameworks are really the critical thing here. There are 4 chapters, we'll go back to that, but these are the first 2 chapters. So ultra-realism, where to go with that? Okay, well, the most recent work that I've read is The Death of the Left, and that is by Winlow and Hall. It's actually a 2023 publication. But us being us, we discussed that as a reading group with Tara in December of last year before it was officially published. And something that Leanne said really, Leanne on our call, Leanne McRae, something that Leanne said really grabbed me, and I knew it was actually one more big link in my thinking process. And she linked social harm, which is not a subset of ultra-realism, it's just a number of frameworks all coexisting. So we have ultra-realism, we have deviant leisure, and then within deviant leisure and across into the field of semiology, we have social harm. And Leanne very brilliantly did say that she was looking at the intimacy of harm, and that is, yeah, everywhere I want to go. The artifact absolutely will go there without any doubt at all. So I don't know whether we will do more questions on it, but ultra-realism is a really large framework, and the ultra-realists are actually quite happy to be challenged, and they have some YouTube videos out and a whole lot of stuff going on. But I love that about them, that they are prepared to be challenged. They would love to have a theory that does better than their theory, and that's impressive in any way. So let's move to feminism. I would have said to you feminism was my gap in terms of theory, but I have reframed that to see that feminism is my opportunity. And the most blank slate of this PhD is the work that I'm going to do in feminism. So I have been a feminist all my life, but I have taken for granted the theory that went with it. That's just how I live my life. So I am very, very excited about that space. So we're going to begin with Elizabeth Probyn, Outside Belongings, but we're also going to look at, you know, obviously Germaine Greer in the 1970-71, and we're going to look at Anne Summers, Dan Tor and God's Police 75, which is the year we're focusing on. And then It's Unknown. So it is very exciting. It's unknown where that's going to go. Next slide, please. So one thing, just briefly, I love the Coca-Cola sign. It's really iconic of King's Cross, Australia, and it's actually been removed in that form, and it hasn't always been there. It was put up in that form in 1974. So it really does capture a very particular moment in time. And I will mention this again, but I do love to go to King's Cross and see how it's been going. And the King's Cross I go and visit is not the King's Cross I lived in. It doesn't exist, the one I lived in. So creative PhD, creative-led PhD. The other ways that in different disciplines I could handle the same work would be through practice-led research or research-led practice, iterations of the two or combinations of the two. So there's nothing exclusive about creative-led practice as this artifact and exegesis is going. We can still draw on those, and I did use practice-led research in my master's. But what I feel really strongly about this, and it's come to me through writing the research proposal and going one step further somehow in gears, is that actually, if you're doing interdisciplinary work, you cannot do better than the creative-led PhD. And I've somehow come to that, Tara, that there's something even more specific and focused about what you can do with interdisciplinary work here. So next PhD, sure. So significant and original contribution to knowledge. Well, I have to give full thanks to Jamie, who has questioned me on this and questioned, you know, what's important about this. So the injustice that brings the whole thing together is what's important about this, but very specifically, the ultra realists have tended to use ethnography as their not artifact, but as where they go to create their research. And in my case, I'm using an artifact, and it will be a crime novel. So I think there's a whole lot of other things that I think will develop, but that is the one that I'm most sure of for now. Next slide, please. So sonics in the PhD. So when I recently changed supervisors, I had no idea. I mean, I know who else did podcasts, so I can say I always admired that, shall I say, but I had no idea that someone named JQ would come up with a playlist for me with 192 songs on it that goes for 12 hours. And I do listen to it, and you would be stunned at how often I listen to it. And when I have to do a whole, like a 8-12 hour day or something, I dance to it in every half hour to hour to get myself back in and do the next half hour. So the unexpected and amazing gifts of a playlist. The podcasts have proved really more important than I thought. And in particular, I would make a comment about podcast number 6. Podcast number 6 just happens to be the one named Commitment, where Tara has been observing my very, very odd and innovative style in the writing of the novel. And she said to me, I'd like you to commit to that. And I mean, I'm always going to say yes when you ask me those things, but I just am. But I have been really deeply affected by that. And it has given me something I didn't expect. It's given me something that I did not expect it would give me. And I haven't been able to write creatively since. I'm not telling you that, Tara, but only to because it has had a big effect on me, but I'll find my way back to that. But I never thought that anyone would give me permission to write the way I really want to write. So, and thank you over in the chat. Someone will copy paste, please, the chat for me later. Yeah, but it has given me something enormous. And also the podcast, and I noticed Paul Wise on our thing here, on our Zoom meeting, and actually it's been really fascinating watching Twitter and Facebook and the podcasts, and that intellectual community again can be found in so many places. It can be found in Twitter and it can be found in Facebook, and it goes all over the place in ways that are very exciting, really. So we'll leave that for now. But the andragogy behind it is that I'm being treated as an adult learner, and that has made the whole difference. Next slide, please. So ultra quickly, ultra realism, feminism, the creative-led PhD. Something we haven't talked much about is place. I have actually done a lot of research on that on and off over years, at least 9 years now. But it will sit well, and it will have theory in it, and a range of ideas will be in that. But a lot of the work for that is existing in my brain, and that will be a thing where we sit down and go further on that. And I'm very excited for that, because as a creative writer, place is incredibly important to me. Next slide. Thank you, Aidan. So very quickly, someone tell me how I'm going for time.
You're doing fine. We can crunch it through and take the next 6-7 minutes, Maeve. Is that all right?
Thank you, thank you. So plan chapters, the artifact, just to give you some clues here, the second person is, the use of second person is something that I find absolutely fascinating, and it's been fascinating me for years. And I use the work of Monica Fludenik, and she wrote an article in 1993, and I know that in research terms that's old, but she hasn't written since on exactly the topic that she wrote then. She's written on many other things, and she's written this year, last year, like she's prolific. But in the case of second person, she talked about writing to you the reader. And I'm absolutely fascinated by that. The thing that isn't written here is that I'm also fascinated by Virginia Woolf, and I'm also fascinated by the idea of poiesis, which is generative and unifying. So I'm not going to give you too many clues over the next 3 years on the novel. It's private, and I do want to get it published. So it needs to have its own life, but you will get clues. Next slide, please. Yeah, one of the way, I took that photo in 2015. And I love to regularly go to King's Cross, and of course the pandemic, so I haven't been for years. I hope to go later this year. And the novel, one of the aims of the novel is to be a sensory experience. Next slide, please. Timeline and resources, I'll keep that quick. The main thing about the timeline for me is to keep a bit of adaptability to it, to stay focused and committed. And also I want some space where I edit my 60,000 words. And that is something that I go to workshops on creative writing. And when it's someone who's can't wait to see all those things that are scopping up over on the right-hand side there. So yeah, what I'm looking for is 2-3 month chunks in which I'm going to redraft the novel twice. And apart from that, I'll do everything Tara said and the 12 drafting and so on. But that's what I want, that is not normally given. And I think it will bring the novel up to a high level, I hope. The resources I'm looking at, I don't know, occasional trip to a conference. I'm very interested in online conferencing, so I'll leave it at that. Next slide, thank you, Aidan. So I do have an article out, and it looks at deviant leisure, which, as I said, was, and I thought you would love the picture as alongside, and yeah, So, but yeah, deviant leisure has been a really important part of my work, and it still stands as the foundation, but merged with a lot more now. It was more of a narrow focus when I wrote that article a couple of years ago, whereas now I'm using the whole thing as a much broader framework. And I think it allows more freedom. So next slide, please. So silent writing is something that Tara introduced me to, and I still do it in quite a big way, where go online with people, sit, might work for 45 minutes, 25 minutes, get up, have a quick break and go back and we sit. We can see each other online, but we're only talking on a, you know, as we go at different times. So that's been an important part of what's got me to here and allowed me to hang in difficult times. And that link is to the article that the Right Bunch wrote together with Tara's support. And so I have a short piece in that. Next slide, thanks, Aidan. So thought you'd like that photo as well. So let's connect, email, Twitter, Facebook, you know, very happy to learn more, exchange more.
Maeve, that was magnificent. So firstly, can we give it up for Maeve? Fantastic piece of work. I'm going to say that fantastic woman. I'm heading, that's the look I'm going for, Amanda. That is what I'll be wearing to your meeting tomorrow, Amanda. So let's quickly, if we can, go to Gail. I'm conscious of Gail's time. Gail, could you open us up again for questions? And then obviously Gail will have to disappear and we'll go to Leanne. So Gail, batter up.
Look, I will stay for as long as I can, but I'm so sorry, Leanne, for butting in first, just in case we run out of time and I don't get to kind of share this. Thank you, Maeve. I want to say something to Amanda and Maeve together. Is that okay?
That's fantastic.
There's something that's just very, very courageous about both of your research, both of your journeys to research, your continued journeying through your projects, despite all the things that life throws at you. And I think I just wanted to kind of say the one thing, that the thread that pulls us all together, I think here is a common humanity and a grit and a resourcefulness and a community. So thank you, Tara, for bringing us together as community, and thank you to fabulous women for sharing your research with us. And you know, you'll contribute to the discourse arenas, you'll contribute to practice because of your resilience and because of your contributions. So I just wanted to say that as well, which may have been my passing comment, but I may not have time at the end to say that. I don't know if you know this, Maeve, but I did something called an arts-informed PhD, which meant that I took a kind of traditional research approach of garnering data, and then I restoried that data into theatre. And then I wrote about why we need to theatricalise, or why we need to find different forms through which to communicate our research to reach diverse audiences, but also because the language of the communication is itself a function. You know, it's more, so it's beyond a function. It accommodates ways of knowing and ways of understanding that perhaps written language and written codes alone cannot do. So I get your research, and I love your approach to it. I think it's very evocative, and I think that it speaks and accommodates that which may not be spoken in other forms. So a couple of things that that spring to mind as well. You talked a lot, and one of the things, I don't know if you know anything about this, but when I started my PhD, I had never written a formal essay. I'd never cited, and I'd never written a reference formally, as in a citation and then a reference within a list of references, because my undergraduate degree was theatre informed. It was theatre, and so was my honours. So I performed my work. So I had this fear of formal academic writing, and I felt I couldn't write. And I came across some scholarship which literally transformed my life, and I want to share some of that literature with you now, because what it does, or what it did for me, it may not do that for you. It liberated me from thinking that I had to write in a code of communication that is highly classed, gendered, it's masculinized. So it freed me from thinking and feeling that I was lesser because I did not have those formal codes of communication that were then deemed most appropriate within academia. And some of that literature I put in the chat. Laurel Richardson talks about de-disciplining the writing process. So it's a consciousness of the de-disciplining. It's not because I can't write in that way, I'll present it in a different form. It has a different function and different political kind of consciousness around the de-disciplinarity of it. There's a beautiful article by Chidlers, and I'm happy to send you these references, Daza and Ray, that talks about the promiscuity of feminist research, that we can take a bit of that and a bit of that, and where you know, we're not faithful to any one type of a form of communication or scholarship or discipline. You know, we're not restricting ourselves, we're pretty promiscuous in our approach. And again, there's a consciousness and a political activity behind that as well. And I couldn't leave without talking about Sisu and the idea of you know, dismantling the paper penis, this notion that we as women need to write ourselves, and we write through the womb. So I know that these are contested spaces in terms of gender fluidity, and it's not in any way meant as an essentializing factor, but actually if you identify as a woman, then Sisu's work really spoke to me as a woman wanting to find my own woman's voice through my work, and very happy to send you some work that for me really liberated me and allowed me to not just kind of apologetically present my knowledge in a different form, but to do it with consciousness, with political consciousness, and with confidence. You know, I was able to say, I'm doing it in this way because I willfully reject these forms. And these are the reasons why. And I willfully accept and play with these forms because. And I think that that allowed me, the justification gave me the confidence to really explore those different forms in a way that I probably wouldn't have had I not had that literature to support me. Wow. So I'm happy to share that literature.
I would love that. I would love that. And yeah, just I'm absolutely open to ideas and to learn more and to explore more. And the things that you've said there, I could talk about for hours. So understanding that we're a bit time constrained, I will just say to you, I would love to explore all of that further. It sings to me, Gail.
Brilliant. When I was reading your work, for me, it made absolute sense as well that you would engage in some of that reading and thinking. And the other thing two other things really briefly struck me about your work. One, you talked about historicity, which I loved, and the fact that you bring yourself, your history, not just of the space, but of the characters, of the milieu, of the songs, of the beat, of all of the different kind of genres, whether that's musical or kind of creative, cultural, etc. All of those, the sonic world of it. I loved all of that. And the thing that struck me, I guess, was the non-linearity of historicity. I wondered if you might want to explore that a little bit more, that the notion that you don't have to be overly faithful to that which you are presenting as an historical moment, because it is a creative artifact and it is imbued by your history since, as well as your history of that time. And also, I thought really importantly, the history that you brought into your teenage or your young adult life in that space. And by that, I was really touched by the story of your dad. And it was very similar to my dad's experience in some ways. So maybe that was the resonance. But also I was struck by notions of intergenerational trauma that we carry. And I think especially if you are identifying as an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person, it is without doubt that there would be some intergenerational trauma that is carried through that lineage. So I loved the idea of playing with historicity in terms of its non-linearity. And I think that allows you to be a bit creative as well. Again, it's about affordances, isn't it? When we the theories behind this give us great creative affordances that we can play with certain things, and if we need to, we can justify them through those theoretical lenses. I think that's all I wanted to say, but I'm happy to kind of answer any questions that you might have about what I've said as well.
Oh, I love what you said. All I can say is, yeah, I'll be following up everything that you've said. That's what I can say to you. Tara already loves you, so Sisu, I already know that. So it is something we've talked about before, but not quite gone there. So now that's one more permission to go there. And no, I'm just wrapped.
Thank you, Maeve. Thank you, Gail. Before we move to Jan, Gail, can I just use your little bit of expertise for 1 minute if I can, because I know you're about to run off. Being associate head of school is very traumatic, and Jamie's doing very well hanging in there as head of school too. We're very grateful to you both. Gail, in terms of the SOC, the significant original contribution to knowledge, I believe there is a methodological SOC in this thesis. They are the rarest of SOCs that we find. Could I just get, at a provisional level, your view on the methodological SOC, particularly through the mitigating journal?
Look, I think it's all wrapped up to that which I've mentioned before about the non-linearity of historicity. I think it's how it is informed by the sonic landscape, how it's informed by your presence and being, with all of that imbued historicity around post-traumatic stress and intergenerational stress. I think it is, I think it's a rejection of literalism and academic elitism in terms of its form and its function. So I think in that self, if you put all those, it's like a Venn diagram, if you put all of those critical kind of viewpoints and perspectives together, then actually what is at the center is something that is unique in form and in content, because it is imbued by all of these different analyses that have not necessarily been brought together in the past in the same way. The overlay of those different lenses will create a unique kind of lens, if you like, or kaleidoscope. I can't think of the word at this point, but I do think it's the fact that you are looking at a particular time and space through a personhood, and then reflecting that in a creative work that nobody has brought all of those kind of lenses together through that creative practice in the same way that you will have.
So that's an ontological SOC, which is even rarer. Oh, Gail, that's amazing. Can I quickly go to Leanne? I know you may have to go, Gail, but I'll go to Leanne, and we welcome as much as you can give us, and we are so grateful. We cannot thank you for the gift you are to not only Australian higher education, but beyond. So we love you, Gail.
Always a pleasure. Thank you. And I'm going to stay to listen to Leanne's comments, and I'll quietly disappear when I have to.
Fantastic. Love you.
Thanks.
Leanne, you're up, mate. I'm excited by this one. Oh, yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you, Maeve. Really lovely presentation. Thank you for inviting me to comment on your project.
Please.
It's really wonderful. I'm going to say something might be a little bit inappropriate and probably not my place to say it.
Bring it on.
Because I know that Tara's looking after you, but I wrote a note down here when I was reading your document, and I wrote, "You're going to stress yourself out." and I think that, and I think what's coming through and why I wrote that down was, and it's a really good thing, is your enthusiasm and your energy and your investment in this. But I also get what comes through when I read your document is the stakes seem really high for you.
Yeah.
And this is personal, and I've probably got no right to even comment on it in my role, but I just felt like I felt like there's so much at stake here, and as it should be. Do you know what I mean? Like, as it should be.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say to you, it's going to be fine. And
Oh, wow.
and also, and this is a piece of advice that was given to me, and I'm going to pay it forward.
Yeah, please.
Your PhD will not be the most brilliant piece of work that you do. It will be for this moment in your life.
Yeah, yeah.
But it won't be in 10 years' time, in 15 years. You will do far better work.
Okay, wow.
And no, but the reason why I'm saying this to you is because I did the same thing. It was everything. It was like, oh my God. And I worry that you're going, it's such an important piece of work, and I worry that you're going to burn yourself out.
Okay.
Without getting it to where it's going to change the world. Because I can feel you want to change the world, and you should want to change the world.
I do.
And it will, but not if you don't breathe your way through it and take a little bit of the stakes out of it for yourself.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thank you. I take that on board.
Probably something you can talk to Tara a little bit more about.
Yeah.
And there's, okay, so right, that's that bit
Thank
done.
you.
Okay, so let's talk about your work a little bit more. And I know Tara's going to have you onto this, and she knows exactly what I'm going to say right now. Feminism and ultra-realism. The ultra-realists, I believe, are going to argue that class is more important than gender. And you're absolutely right to introduce feminism into that debate. You're absolutely right to attach feminism to ultra-realism, but you're going to have to address that. Okay. And it's a huge bit of work, and I think it's important to take them potentially to task on that, but also providing space and the respect for their argument around class.
Yes.
Because I think their argument around class and its primacy is fundamental, and it needs the space to exist. And you need to really think about and configure how feminism supports or leverages or works with that positioning to a certain extent.
Yep. Yep.
And Tara's looking at me in a very perplexed manner, and I know exactly why.
No, because it's hard thinking. That's hard.
It is really difficult, but I think it's so important. I don't know how to put it without being rude. I really have so much respect for the ultra-realist argument.
Yep.
And I think it's important. I think there's absolutely space to challenge them, as you said, to take them to task. But I think it's such an important intervention, what they've done.
Yes.
And it needs the space to breathe and to be what it is, but also for your argument to add something to that, to provide another perspective on that. I think that's going to be tricky work for you, because it's really challenging work. So good on you for going there, though. It's really exciting.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
I'll be quiet. I could respond to that for a long time too, but basically I would just say to you, I absolutely take that on board. And if I can say, I understand the deep aspects behind why you're saying that, and I've already kind of touched into it myself, and I've already understood what am I going to do to bring this together, rather than and respect the scholarship, you know, full respect to the scholarship, and then still do what I want to do.
Yeah, and look, I know that you will respect that scholarship, and I know that you do have that for it. But I just, I think creating the space for both to exist in your work and is going to be really instrumental in how you build into this significant original contribution to knowledge. Okay.
Thank you.
So moving along, I wanted to talk a little bit about the three modes that you're working with: the thesis component, the exegesis, the artifact, component, and the mitigating journal component. And you do identify in your work that they're going to be three separate things, but I wanted you to think about style, because you do talk about late style. And what I wrote down was, what are the stylish requirements of being creative? What are the stylish requirements of being critical? And what are the stylish requirements of being contextual?
Boom!
And I wanted, and particularly because I was thinking about the mitigating journal, and I knew intuitively why you have it, but you hadn't explained it.
Oh, okay.
And I wanted to know if this was, you know, again, tapping into what I was talking to Amanda about, is this kind of a third space? And is this, you know, how do you build it into an authentic third space rather than being just a separate kind of third component of your work? How does that work to bridge, bleed, blend those elements together, if that's how it's supposed to work? Again.
Wow.
All right. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is, okay, what's the most important thing? I'm going to talk about sound, because I think this is really interesting. And I think at the moment, sound is a little bit of an addendum, a kind of a side thing in your, it's kind of like, oh, I'm doing podcasts, I'm thinking about music, I'm thinking about sound. I'd really like for you to think about how sound is going to weave into your work and into your project, in terms of what is the relationship between sound and theory, what is the relationship between sound and ultra realism, is sound a pathway to the real? And you know, and you talk about the senses and the real, the sound and the real, and how is class and sound connected.
Wow.
Kind of things just filtered into my head as you were talking about these things, because I feel like, when I read your work and I knew there was this sonic component, I thought, well, how is she going to weave sound into the ultra? And then I kind of realized, oh no, it's at the moment, it's kind of on the outside, around the edge of your project, which is not a problem, you know, I'm not trying to suggest otherwise, but what is the role of voice, sound, and how we write ourselves, how we hear those voices in our head when we read? You know, it's class and sound, particularly because the snippets that you've given in the insight into your novel is very class based. And you know, and how that is going to filter through into your work. So I'd like for you to think more about that. And the last thing I'm going to say is about the relationship between gender and harm. And I like in your novel how you seem to be flipping this idea of women as a victim, that the woman seems to be the detective and it's the man who's the victim. I think that's really important. But I also wanted to think about a little bit in terms of what are women expected to know at different times in their life? Because you talked about young women and body image issues, and older women and money issues, and that relationship. And I was also thinking about, in terms of harm, the idea of women as embodiment of and for the side of harm, and women as the bearers of harm, whereas as men as the inflictors of harm, and what that relationship is a little bit. And that's a very binarized way to frame that, and a very inaccurate way to frame that. But I was just thinking about that in terms of about, you know, this binary between this thinking of men enacting harm, women bearing harm, and what that actually means in terms of your work. Yeah, thanks, Maeve. That was really great. That's all I'm probably going to throw at you for the moment.
Wow. OMG, Leanne. That is mind-blowing. You have blown my mind. Gail has supported my mind, and I feel like, oh, okay, I can be me. And Leanne has blown my mind out of the Zoom call. So, I look forward to any interaction with you, Leanne, as I progress in any way, in any shape or form. Same goes for Gail, but she knows that. So I have pages of notes that have all blown my mind.
That's fantastic. I want to ask Leanne, if I can, one question, clarifying question, and then we'll open up for a final 10 minutes for all our wonderful people that have stayed with us, for which we are so grateful. Now, why I sort of started to laugh slightly about Leanne offering a commentary on intensity, that's the equivalent of, like, I can't even go there, but can I say, when I first met Maeve, her intensity only reminded me of one other human being, and that would be Leanne McRae. You both grab the thesis and you hold onto it till the blood stops in your finger. So the idea that Leanne is offering that commentary, it's like, but Leanne, what I want to say to you is, and you need to help me on this, the creative PhD is easier if you have visual artifacts, sonic artifacts, they're the artifacts, and the exegesis is written. The toughest creative-led doctorates are the ones that have all components that are written. And you gave us something crucial here, where you've actually described the three modalities of writing as creative, critical, and contextual. That is, I'm glad we've recorded it, that is a brilliant moment. But is there anything, Leanne, because I worry about this, because you don't need the three looking the same. People fail the creative PhDs when the novel reads like the exegesis. So is there any advice you would offer about separating the modality so they don't bleed, or should they?
Well, that's that's really incredible, because my kind of initial kind of response when I thought about the three was that the mitigating, I kind of didn't understand. I mean, I did know what the function of the mitigating journal was, but how was it going to bring those two things? Was it going to be a hybrid document, or was it going to be a standalone document that did something separate? And I think the stylistic question, I think maybe can help. What kind of style of the writing can operate across all three documents, but the different stylistic elements of the writing, perhaps. And Jamie's got his hand up, so maybe he can add.
Yes. So that's tremendous, Leanne. That is helpful. We're now in question time, colleagues, to bring this home. Professor Quinton.
Thank you. I was going to save my question to the end, but it's really pertinent right now. I was going to ask about the creative-led PhD, and I have this impression, and it may be wrong, that the artifact is created and then the exegesis critically analyzes the point of the artifact and so on. Is there any back and forth between the two? Because in the process of creating the exegesis, you develop knowledge and then it might actually inform the artifact. And when you go back and forth, capturing that in the mitigating journal is what allows the mitigating journal to be separate and different to the other two. That was my thoughts.
And can I comment quickly on that?
Certainly can.
So I love that, and interesting, which relates to the chat as well, Jacob, because I have been thinking, when you do a humanities-based creative-led practice-led research, they're very, very keen on a metaphor that brings it all together. And so we're not necessarily going to worry about that, but on the other hand, I'm used to thinking about that. And the metaphors that I have previously used have tended to have a mathematical tone to them. And I see the metaphor being a mathematical metaphor that allows iteration and movement, but that also shows that, this is a massive subject area. I'll leave it at that.
Yes, no, that's very useful. So I think, Maeve, some exegesis artifacts do have that iterative component, but you have to signal incredibly strongly and with great clarity to examiners so they know what they're reading. You must be a tour guide through your own research, and it's much more complex.
And to answer Leanne's question and Jamie's question, I think it will be a little bit more research-led. It is creative-led PhD, but it has a research-based practice to it. And that is very much relating to Tara's idea of the pebble and the pond. So, the idea of you're standing at the pond and essentially you've done your exegetical work, and then you throw the pebble, and the throwing of the pebble is extending the exegetical work into a place it could not possibly otherwise go. So in my head, but I have to say, I take on board completely the questions that you've raised about it. And I think, personally, I do think the mitigating journal, that has a long historical tale in the humanities. That's got lots of literature written about it, which I've already experienced, and which I will put in that, make sure is put into further iterations of what I'm doing. And I do think it's a third style of writing, and I think Tara and I could come up with a key so that the assessor and examiner will know what I am expecting of myself in each stylistic grouping.
Magnificent. Thank you, Maeve. Now, colleagues, of course, we're in the open time as well. So, Amanda, you'll be demuting at different points. I see Cheryl has her hand up. Queen Cheryl, we love you. Good afternoon, madam.
Good afternoon, Tara. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Great to see you. Who would you like to talk to?
Maeve. I'd like to talk to Maeve. Maeve, that was great. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because I haven't read your paper, so I'm just going on what we've heard today. But as to the theme of the injustice that you identified, and I'm wondering whether the nature of that injustice, whether it might be racial, whether it might be persecutory, whether it could be an economic injustice, whatever that injustice is, does it inform or relate to the tone of your creative work? Because I'm thinking of the unusual nature of the second person voice. Does it sort of lead towards a particular tone in the creative work?
That is a brilliant question, and I can tell you that it does. And in part of my master's was that I did a research study on, does second person improve empathy in the reader? So it entirely, and the answer is very conflictual. So second person is something that people love or hate, and second person, but what I studied was full use of second person, where, as in Nikki Gemmell, where you're talking about the entire book is written you, the whole book. And I'm not doing that. I'm doing Monica Fludnik's you as addressee, which is that it appears, but it's interspersed. But I'm very aware of the you, the second person, and even moving that to first and third person because the novel moves around. But yes, what to say? But you are correct. It is intentionally in there to impact the reader, and it will impact positively and negatively as it rolls, I would think.
Thank you. Great.
Excellent question. Thank you, Cheryl. And Paul, I don't know if you want to demute or de-video. And obviously it's like 2 a.m. in the morning for you, I think, Paul. Do you want to say hi, or do you want me to read your question? Bless him. I'll ask the memory question for you. You can come in if you'd like to. So the role of memory and the manipulation of memory, Maeve. So what we think we remember, how you're going to, through not only the artifact but the exegesis, manage memory, what you remember, what you don't remember, what you unremember, what you forget, what you never knew.
Yeah. And what you categorize incorrectly through the memory. So Kendria and I are firm colleagues and have a lot of actual intersections in our work. And Tara mentioned the idea of memory as something that I could be studying along with everything else. And and I think Leanne's point is that I'll probably end up leaving that to you, Kendria. Otherwise, I'm going to have too many things to write about. I really take that on board, Leanne. And I get that, going back to you, Kendria, I get that the other ultra intense person would say it to me. And I would thank you for that. I would always want you to do that, Leanne, if you felt inspired to, because Tara is looking after me, but on the other hand, it's me looking after me when I'm sitting here at my desk or whatever it is that I'm doing. And I do yoga every half hour as I write to try to keep myself sane.
Yes, and Maeve, Leanne is right to be frightened because I can't even look after myself. So it is a truth that she has spoken there.
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, Dan, can I ask Amanda a question? And then colleagues, please whack your hand up because we're nearing the end of the party. Now, Amanda, I want to address overtly the politics of what you are doing and the courage of what you're doing. Gail's already talked about the grit of that, but the power of the small data set, and Jamie, you might also want to speak to this, and having confidence and courage to say, yes, this is a small data set, and we are progressing with the small data set. It's not representative, but in this field where there is nothing, this is something. Are you in a position mentally and intellectually and emotionally where you can embody the courage of the small data set and walk with it?
Yes, well, you know, I was actually thinking about that the other day, and given what I've found in relation to the mathematics not being used as much in both English and Japanese speakers, then I started to think, well, okay, that's just a small size. Does that then transfer across to other locations around the world or to other schools, even, you know, in Japan? Even though it's a small sample, would that transfer across? I'm not sure. I'm not a statistician, but do you know what I mean? That sort of, it just made me wonder about that.
Yes, and look, I'll activate Jamie Quinton at this point too. And so I think that's what you just stated there is the courage I wanted. So that's really powerful. But Jamie, I must be wondering, and you must be feeling your small intestine eating your large intestine, because when people are talking about interdisciplinarity through the IB, it's like interdisciplinarity with everything except maths. Now, can one have interdisciplinarity without mathematics, which, like philosophy, is the very foundation of knowledge? So I think Amanda's picked up something very interesting there. Do you want to go to that, brother?
So I was going to talk about the small data set, Amanda. You know full well that if it's not representational, you can't draw generalizations and so forth. But the advantage of the small data set is you can at least capture a lens that people may not be willing to consider, right? And you can point out that this is indicative of a potential issue, and then it leads to more generalizable concepts and investigations and so forth. What I was thinking about for you, Amanda, about the third space was that if the third space is considered to be between disciplines, if you start with disciplines and you're looking for a third space between them, that third space doesn't necessarily need to be interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. It can be something else altogether. And there's opportunity that is afforded by it, right? So, you know, you're thinking about Japan in particular, but the general approach is translatable to everyone. It doesn't have to be that specific example. You can use that example to develop ideas and knowledge and concepts, but then think about how they can be more broadly applied. And that would be creating a third space conceptually when you apply it as well.
Yes, very, very good. Thank you, Jamie. That's crucial.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's very useful. Very good. Amy, go for it, my darling.
Hi, so I just wanted to extend what Jamie's talking about, and Amanda, please feel free to contact me. But something that I've looked at with the Australian curriculum is that educators fail, or no, they don't fail, that's the wrong word. They interpret things in different ways, and some of them feel very free to have creative license and kind of work with it, and some of them feel very constrained by it. So I think there's probably similarities in the IB space. So in terms of how you're looking at the curriculum and the experiences of the people that are telling you about how they're working with it. So I think it definitely applies more broadly. And I have maybe a contact for you that will either help with survey distribution or just thinking around this. But yeah, it's definitely relevant, not just in IB. I already know it's relevant across Australian curriculum, and I'm sure other places in the world.
Yeah.
Maeve, I also have a quick comment
Thank
for you. So actually it's two things. First thing, you talked about drafting of your book.
Yep.
I wondered, have you thought about beta readers? And then if you have thought about that, how are they going to inform your thesis process in any way or be incorporated into that story? They don't have to be, it was just a thought. And then the other thing is, not so much for now, but for later, come and talk to me about marketing for your book, because I have ideas with libraries and channels, and also audiobooks, because we've been talking about Sonic. Is it a written thing or is it an audio thing? Or is it both?
I'm so glad you came. You have blown my mind again. There are already lined up beta readers, and Lou down there in the yellow t-shirt is one of my key lined up beta readers. Hey, Lou. Lou is a very, very great support to me, and me to her. I hope she would think that. Nod, Lou. And some of the people that I have been in the Right Bunch with, they are mega readers, mega. So like they stop reading they only do exegesis. They stop reading their exegesis at 5, 6, 7, whatever o'clock. And then they go to bed with a creative written novel. And they don't finish the night till they have, Lou reads with her coffee, actually, but other people I know. So I have been lining them up very, very quietly for years, but no one ever asks me that. So I have never had to mention it prior. And Tara and I will have to discuss that. And that's brilliant. And I will absolutely be following you up, Amy, so be certain. And you're already on my radar, but now you're very on my radar. So
no worries at all. And Amanda, please come talk to me with Qualtrics and data questions too, because I did survey analysis with educators in my research, so I may have thoughts or suggestions.
Wow. Amy's very super.
She is. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amy. Now, colleagues, I'm conscious of time. We've taken so much of your time. I thank you for your generosity in the middle of the night, very early in the morning for Amanda, for Leanne. Can I thank particularly Amanda? Can I thank Maeve for being astonishing? I really want to thank Gail and Leanne, and this is really important. They are doing this work for free. Far too much work in international higher education is being done for free. And we've got a lot of people talking and gobbing and talking way beyond their expertise. And it is time, I think, that we really focus on the great people who have done the hard work, who have published well, published expansively, and wish to share that with the world. So Leanne and Gail, we thank you both so much. Amanda and Maeve, you remain a great inspiration to us today, tomorrow, and into the future. And for all the wonderful people who have joined us on this journey, we thank you. Have a lovely afternoon. Have a lovely working day, Leanne. And we wish you all every future success and happiness. You are brilliant. Rock and roll. We're out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Tara. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Leanne.
Talk tomorrow, Amanda. Talk tomorrow, Leanne.
Bye.
Thank you, Leanne.
Well done, mate. Well